Hello and welcome. I am fine art photographer and Olympus educator Matt Suess from Bozeman, Montana, and welcome to my very first ever live stream going out to Facebook and YouTube. Knock on wood that this is going to go without too many issues at all. Really excited for the very first show to have fellow Olympus educator Rob Knight from Atlanta, Georgia here, and together we're going to be talking about the brand new Olympus 150-400mm lens that was just announced a little while ago, and we were both fortunate enough to get our hands on it for a little while and do some out in the field testing with this lens, and wanted to share our experiences with you guys, and let us know if you have any questions too. There's whether you're on Facebook or on my YouTube or on Rob's YouTube, go ahead and add some comments to the chat, and we'll try and address as many questions as we can. And hey, Rob, welcome very much to this show.
Thanks, Matt. This was a great idea, and I appreciate you going through all the technical shenanigans to get us both on the air and all the places. And I think this is going to be fun. This has definitely been one of my most commented on videos, my review of the 150-400, and I know that you and I have actually discussed the comments that we've gotten on our respective YouTube channels. So I think this is going to help a lot of people out.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're talking about YouTube, go ahead, no matter who you're, where you're watching this from. If you want to find me on YouTube, I'm at Matt Suess Photo. Go ahead and click on that subscribe button and the notify button to get notified of any new videos. And same thing with Rob. He's at Rob Knight Photography. Go ahead and subscribe to his channel, hit that notification button, and get updated on all new videos. And Rob, you do a bunch of reviews and testing and out in the field stuff with your YouTube channel, don't you?
I do. Yeah, I actually did a series during the I guess it was kind of a quarantine series about just beginning photography, because that's one of the things that I know everybody starts with, the exposure triangle and what all those pieces are and how they work. So there's my most recent series is about that. And so if you're just getting into photography, although I can't imagine anybody actually looking into this lens is just getting into photography, but if you know anybody that's just getting into photography, there's some, nice, easy beginner videos for you there.
Yeah. And you teach workshops too. And, what's your specialty with photography and being an Olympus educator?
Well, I'm a travel and nature photographer. So I usually shoot on the road, and a lot of, I go to Costa Rica normally 2 or 3 times a year. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of nature subjects there. I photograph birds and wildlife and landscapes, but I also like cultural things. And I find that whatever you learn about photography helps all the other photography that you do. So you still need an interesting subject and good light and complementary background. There's things that are kind of ubiquitous to photography. So whether it's Costa Rica or whether it's Route 66 in Arizona, it's there's a lot of the similar opportunities for learning and for me for teaching.
Yeah. And boy, I don't think you weren't able to go down to Costa Rica this past year, unfortunately, because of the virus, and hopefully things are going to clean up a little bit this year. What do you think about making a trip down to Costa Rica and taking down a 150-400mm lens with you?
I cannot wait to go. I am crossing my fingers that I'll get to go in January. I'm actually doing a sort of a private online workshop, and I'm going to hopefully be able to borrow the 150-400 for that. That's going to be in January. So as you know, Matt, because you do workshops too, I've actually had a couple of small groups this fall, and just the stress of the liability of taking people out and having people travel in this environment is it's really more than I want to put up with professionally, honestly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do this online private workshop, and I'll be responsible for myself to travel to Costa Rica. I'm confident that I can keep me and my assistant safe and everything. And then we'll just be the two of us, and we'll broadcast live from there and that kind of thing. So hopefully that'll, then I can travel and I can do what I enjoy doing and teach, and without having to take on a bunch of extra liability that none of us want to do right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a real interesting time right now. I mean, you're with the liability, and you don't want to do anything to endanger, endanger your students at all, or anything like that. And with just the uncertainty, it's been a rough year for everyone, I'm sure. And so we're looking for a better 2021 for all of us included. But but going back to you going down to Costa Rica, how's that lens gonna help you out there?
Well, normally I travel with sort of a sample of telephoto lenses. I'll take the 300mm f4 lens. And just to clarify, I think everybody watching this probably understands, we're talking about the Olympus system of lenses. And so I'll normally use the EM1X when I'm shooting wildlife, and also an EM1 Mark III. So generally, if I'm shooting wildlife, I'll have the 300mm f4 with the 2X teleconverter on it, on the EM1X, and then I'll have the 40-150 with the MC14 teleconverter on it on the other camera body. So I've got the flexibility of the zoom lens with the 40-150 with the teleconverter, and then I've got the long reach with the 300 f4 and the teleconverter on that. So for me, the first thing I thought about when I got my hands on this lens is it takes the place of all of that. This one lens, the 150-400 f4.5, is going to take the place of the 300 f4 with the teleconverter on the long end. It's not, it's 200 millimeters shorter by itself, but I can throw the 1.4 or the 2X converter on it and make it, exponentially longer on the long end. And then it also has that flexibility of the 40-150 with the teleconverter. So if I need to zoom out, if I need to back off, if my subject's closer to me, that's no problem. Not to mention the minimum focus distance on that lens is only 1.3 meters. So I'm 2 meters tall, right? So that means I can, standing up, I can literally focus on the ground between my feet with this lens. And so that's all of the telephoto lenses I carry, plus a macro lens, all in one shot. So that, for me, the flexibility is invaluable.
Yeah, and this lens is compact and small enough and light enough that it can fit in carry-on luggage, which is a huge benefit too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we got a message here that just came in, comment here from Jason. Let me see if I can throw that up on the screen. He said that it looks like pre-orders have sold out already. So I don't know anything about that. We're hearing that first from you, Jason. But yeah, we did kind of understand going into this that supply was going to be limited initially with this lens, and demand, we were expecting demand to be pretty large. So, unfortunately hearing that it's sold out on pre-orders already, that's a little bit of a bummer. But I'm sure they're going to be working hard to get more of these lenses made.
Well, I would say too, try your local camera store first, because from what I understand, the camera stores have sort of an allotment of pre-orders that they can each make. So if your camera store down the street doesn't have something, then call Allen's Camera. I work with them a lot. They're in Pennsylvania, but they mail order. So, call Allen's, say, hey, I want this lens, and see if they can pre-order you one. See if, Hunt's Photo can pre-order you one. There's lots of different options. And geez, I don't know of a decent camera store that doesn't do mail order now. So no matter what part of the country you're in, you should be able to get on somebody's list, I would think.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We don't know where Jason was trying to pre-order his, so it could just be that one particular venue that was sold out of their pre-order allotment.
That's right.
Yeah, so I had a chance to photograph this lens for about 4 or 5 days, and I had to, the people at Olympus told me that I had to send it to you next, and I was, man, I was really upset. People don't know I was sending Rob all these messages being like, hey, if I send you the 40-50, if I paint it white, you're not going to notice, are you? And then like the day I had to bring it down to to FedEx to overnight it to him, I'm like, oh shoot, Rob, the car broke down. And he's like, oh, hey, well, here, I'll call an Uber for you and, get you down to FedEx.
I got you. Do you need gas money? What do you need? Yeah.
Man, I mean, nothing personal. I just did not want to send that lens to you.
I know. When I got the email 3 days later, hey, can you send the lens back on Monday? I was like, well, I was gonna change my name and move to Costa Rica, but then there's the new passport and getting the kids' names changed. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So I guess I'll just send the lens back instead.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't checking my email that last month. I kind of missed missed the messages from you. But
that's right.
yeah, I mean, and I'm sure you can attest to this too. When I first got my hands on that lens and pulled it out of the box, I was just like, wow. Okay, first off, this is lightweight. It seemed maybe a little bit smaller than expected to me, just holding it in my hands. I mean, we'd seen mock-ups of it before, and this lens has been out in the rumor mill for quite a while, so kind of had an idea on what to expect. But man, just getting it in your hands, and then especially when I put it on my EM1X, it seems like this lens is specifically made for the 1X. I got an EM1 Mark III and a Mark II and a couple other cameras. I actually totally forgot to even put the lens on those other ones. As soon as I put it on the EM1X, it was like, okay, this is the lens that was made for this camera body. And the weight balance between lens and camera was just amazing. And being able to hand hold it, I mean, I was hand holding it the entire day and wasn't getting tired. And, I'm not one to be known to hang out in the gyms all the time. So it's definitely just the weight or lack of weight with the setup. And, how were your initial reactions when you got it too?
Almost exactly the same. In fact, when the box came, I thought, oh, well, maybe this isn't the lens, because the box didn't weigh as much as I expected it to with this big super telephoto lens in it. And like you, when I put it on the 1X, I was like, oh, but it's as if they literally designed it just for that body. And I didn't use it on any other bodies either, but I shoot a lot of vertical shots. I just have I don't know, I just tend to shoot vertical a lot. So for me to be able to use the 1X and have the basically the built-in grip, so I can shoot vertically without having to crane my arm around my head and that kind of thing, that's why it's my go-to for the longer glass especially. But I can't even explain how well it balances on the 1X. It feels great. The only time my arms got tired is when I went to the park up the street from my house, and there was a woodpecker eating these berries, and he must have been 200 feet in the air above my head. So holding, but I was basically holding my arms, straight up in the air for a few minutes. But just in regular use, it like you said, it's not heavy at all. It's kind of wild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got a question from Michelle here. Let me throw this up here. And so how much does it cost, and is it used for video cameras? So the US price is $7,500. The Canadian price is $9,999. Is that right, Rob? I believe that was the Canadian price.
Yeah.
It's $7,500 US dollars. And is it used for video cameras? Yeah. So it's an Olympus lens. It's a micro four thirds, so it can work on Olympus and Lumix cameras. And it actually does some really great video work too. And a little bit longer, or a little bit further into this broadcast, I have some video that I shot of an elk with this that I'll roll. So we'll address that. But yeah, for wildlife photographers, I can't wait to shoot more video. I actually even end up shooting more video than stills for a while when I get my own copy of this lens. Let's see here.
Because one of the great things about the Olympus system in general, including this lens, is the image stabilization, which is also effective for video. Plus the firmware update that just came out on the 2nd that includes raw video output to Atmos Ninja 5 recorder. So if you're a videographer and you want to shoot nature photography, it's going to be a really compelling setup for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got Faglar, sorry if I mispronounced that, put on the list in September. I'm number 3 on the store and expect at least 4. Congratulations. I hope you get that soon. And let's see here, we got...
Can I borrow it?
Yeah. You could probably make some, there's a whole new market there for lens rentals if you can get your hands on that. And
I know, I thought about looking for an investor and just renting it out when I'm not in the field.
So Rich ordered his early, so hopefully he'll be in the first release. Heard it's delayed again. And, again, we don't know anything
I'm not sure if there's a delay so much as they didn't expect there to be so many pre-orders. So the first batch that they were planning to make is already spoken for, and they'll have to ramp up production.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a delay from the original release in January. It's just that they're going to have to make up a bunch more. So.
Mm-hmm. So we actually have some video, Rob. You mentioned you were bringing that down to the zoo, and let me see if I can pull this up here, and let me pause that video and get you back on screen. And yeah, this is a video that you had recorded when you were out at the zoo, and why don't you explain it, and I'll roll the tape, and you can kind of talk about what you were doing here with the setup.
Sure. There's a couple of things that I noticed. Honestly, I didn't even notice until I was watching myself use this in these video clips. But you can see it's not like I'm ham-fisting this thing to hold it up. It just balances really nicely. It doesn't get heavy around your neck. Like I was talking about, shooting vertically. It's just so nimble to throw this lens around. It struck me immediately how it didn't get in my way, which sounds crazy, but when I go out to shoot, I'm just going to use the lens like I expect it to work. And then normally you'll find sort of the ragged edge of what it's good for and what it's not good for. And one of the best things I can say about any piece of gear is that I really didn't notice it when I was using it. So you can see here the last 5 inches of the lens here, that's actually the lens shade. So it's only it's that whole end there is all lens shade, and it's actually plastic that's wrapped in carbon fiber. So it's strong, but it's lightweight as well. And right there is the built-in teleconverter, which I found really convenient to use. You'd literally just throw your finger over and activate that or not. But this is an example of how closely you can focus. My buddy Eddie Tapp was filming this video, and he said, I pointed it down at this little meerkat. He said, it doesn't focus that close. I'm like, dude, watch this. And I took a picture between my feet, and he was just like, oh my God. I mean, he couldn't even believe it. So it was a lot of fun. I wish I'd had a little notice and I could have planned a better trip, but it was literally, hey, do you want to use the 150-400 tomorrow? And I went, yeah. And they said, okay. And then I had like 4 days that I could use it. So, that was about as exciting as I could get on short notice.
Well, hey, I mean, even on short notice, I mean, you got some great images with that, and got to get a good feel for the lens and what it's capable of doing. And
that's right. And the second day that I went out with it, I actually went to the botanical garden here in Atlanta, and just focused on basically using it as a giant macro lens, and I was really pleased with that. That was one of the things that when I got it, I realized, like, man, if it really does close up as well as I think it will, then this is going to be even more versatile than I thought. And sure enough, like I said, I've just shot, flowers and bees and things like that, and just had a really great time with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did I forgot to throw out a little disclaimer here. Rob and I are both sponsored by Olympus as Olympus educators. They didn't ask us to do this video at all or anything. Rob and I were just chatting amongst ourselves, and wanted to put together a video addressing all the questions and things like that, and just talk about our experiences. So these views are our own opinion and not necessarily that of the company, but just throw out that little disclaimer there. And but yeah, you're mentioning all the, the features of the lens. I mean, a lot of care and attention seemed to go into all these specific details on the lens. The tripod collar, it has a little rubber grip on the top of it. It's an Arca Swiss mount, so you can easily put it onto your tripod head. You made a great point in your YouTube video just about the travel distance that you have on zoom in is not very far, so you can really go from 150 to 400 really fast. And with it being weather sealed, that lens hood is also really, it's a strong lens hood, and it fits on there nice and secure. I find myself a lot of times with those types of lenses, I don't use the lens hood a lot unless it's inclement weather and it's sized perfectly to keep snow and rain off the front element. And even speaking about the front element, they put some sort of a coating on it that the water is supposed to just bead on it and wipe off real easy as opposed to smearing. But, it's amazing the detail and attention that they put and thought that they put into this lens.
It definitely feels that way when just to hold the lens, it just feels like a hand designed lens that is made to use. It's, some lenses, they're fine, and you kind of don't notice the fit and finish, and you're glad that it's sharp and that it works like it's supposed to. But maybe the zoom ring is a little stiff, or maybe there's all sorts of complaints I've heard over the years about whatever lens. But this thing is just, everything's so smooth. Like you said, the rubber grip on the tripod collar. So if you have the collar on the top of the lens as a handle, you have a little something to grab onto. And adding to that, just goofy stuff like there's little detents built in when you're turning the tripod collar. So even on the other Olympus lenses, if I'm going to move the tripod collar, I've got to turn the lens, and then I have to line up the little registration marks to make sure that I'm, true vertical or true horizontal if I'm on a tripod. Well, this has a little click stop. Okay,
right
now it's horizontal. And I never thought about that until I get this lens, and I did that. And I was like, oh, that's nice. I don't even have to think about that. I just, right.
So we got a question from Sherman. Go ahead, Rob. Finish yours.
Sure. It does not have the manual focus clutch on the lens. That's a good question, because most of the Pro Olympus lenses do have you pull the focus ring back and you get that manual focus, but it does not do that.
Yeah.
There's a switch on the lens.
Yeah. So you have the
autofocus, manual focus switch.
Yep. Yeah. And so the way I shoot, and I've been doing this for years, is that I set my camera up for rear button autofocus. And I also have the manual override enabled in the camera, so that when I let go of my thumb, all I have to do is just start turning the manual focus ring, and I'm in manual focus. And so that's the way I've shot for years and years. And so, sometimes the clutch even messes me up a little bit, oh shoot, is it pulled in or pulled out or something like that. But with this lens in particular, when you're set up for rear autofocus and you have it manual focus enabled override, then just let go of your thumb and you're right in manual focus.
That's right. And it's funny you mentioned that on the 300mm f4. We got it right here. The first thing I do, even just now when I picked it up, is pull that ring forward, because of so many times I've like, oh, there's an animal, and I'll throw the camera up and it won't focus, and I can't figure out why. It's because I've bumped the manual focus clutch, and it's in manual focus instead of autofocus. So
every time you pull it out,
for one, don't miss that.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
So do you miss that extra third of a stop that you lose? So the 300mm, that's an f4 lens, and the 150-400, it's a fixed 4.5. So it's 4.5 throughout the entire zoom range. So Rob, you missing that third of a stop?
Not a bit.
No, it's
not one bit.
Such a small difference.
Seriously, if I have to crank the ISO up a third of a stop, it's okay.
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah, you're not going to notice that at all. Yeah. So I have a little video here. This was when I was out there shooting with it right before Rob got it. And I was told that they made the lens white, Rob, so you can hide when you're out there photographing in the snow. Is that what you...
That's right. It's for Austrian commandos, because they operate in the snow so often.
Of course, I didn't do that good wearing a blue jacket. I mean, I probably should have had a white jacket on, and... no, some people are, I've seen some of the silly comments out there, that, oh, they're just trying to be like Canon and Sony with the white lens. And people don't realize that back in the film days in the 60s and 70s that Olympus had white lenses before, and it's, and they're large lenses. And why is that, Rob?
Well, this is not just a painted white lens. This actually has a thermal barrier built into it that includes the white exterior. And if you think about, if you've ever tried to photograph anything at any distance, when it's hot and you're shooting over, say, hot pavement or hot rocks or something like that, and you see the little heat waves, well, the last thing you want is for that kind of heat to build up in between the actual elements inside of your lens. So on a huge piece of metal like this, that is, if you're out in the sun with this thing, it's going to absorb a lot of heat if it has the opportunity to. So this white thermal coating is a way to get that, so you still can get sharp photos even on a hot day in the sun.
And to prevent any expansion or contraction inside the lens that could mess it up. And so here's some video I was talking about. I think it was, I forget who had asked that question. but just about shooting video. I think that was that Michelle from Facebook? But this was shot. I was shooting this in 4K, camera mounted on the tripod, and again, the great thing about this millimeter range, I mean, this is such a huge range. 150 to 400 on the micro four thirds. We're talking 300 to 800 on a full frame, and that's not even talking about the built-in teleconverter or the other teleconverters you can add onto it. But it gives you a lot of reach so you can photograph things that are far away. The other thing too is that it allows you to stay far away from your subjects as well. Case in point, like this elk here, you don't want to get close to these animals. For one, they can do some serious damage to you. And you can tell this guy's checked me out. He knows where I am, but he's not threatened. I'm at a far, safe distance where he's just like, okay, who's that person? All right, whatever. He's out there taking some pictures, and then he goes back to eating. And I think that's really important, being a nature photographer and wildlife photographer, is trying not as much as possible to, disturb the animals and get close enough where all of a sudden, they're breathing heavy and they're getting nervous and they're getting stressed. I mean, animals have enough of a hard time just surviving, especially in the parks with all the people, without the stress of a photographer being so close to them. And with this type of a reach, you can get amazing photos that are more natural because the animal is more natural and not threatened. And this is a fabulous lens for wildlife.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. And that's one of the reasons that, a lens like this is for professional nature photographers, is because, like you said, we don't want to get in an animal's face. We want to observe the animal. We want to see it in its natural habitat, and we want to be able to photograph it from a safe distance, safe for me, safe for the animals. And yeah, case in point, the only workshop I've led this fall, for wildlife was in Grand Tetons in September. And there was a spot where several of us were parked along the side of the road photographing a coyote, and he was hunting, and everybody had great big long lenses, and we're all shooting from a safe distance. And then this gal walks out, literally walked toward the coyote, and she looked like maybe an entry-level DSLR with a kit lens on it. So she didn't have the right lens to photograph that. So she thought she was just going to walk out to the coyote. So of course the coyote went away, and none of us could make a picture of that. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have the right tools, it's really hard to be a nature photographer, a wildlife photographer.
Yeah. Yeah. And so someone was asking, let's see here, how far away from him was I? I had to have been at least about 70, 75 yards away. That was on the side of the road in Yellowstone as you were leaving the park. And, again, whenever I'm out there, I'm always, trying to read the animal and see what's going on with the animal. Is it breathing heavy? Is it all of a sudden getting startled at all or anything like that? And try not to make any sudden movements. And, it is, like Rob said, it's about my safety, but it's also about the animal's safety as well. And if I'd noticed anything at all, with the animal, then you always back off and give the animal its respect. Mm-hmm. So Rob, we've touched on a little bit, let's maybe address this a little bit further. Who is this lens for, and who's it not for?
Well, it's, like you and I talked about yesterday, this lens is for a lot of our clients. The people who come on nature photography workshops are generally, at least proficient photographers, usually advanced amateurs at least. They are people who have the time and the money to invest in a hobby like nature photography. And a lot of my clients over the years have had the Canon 600mm f4 and these big lenses that cost $10, $12, $15,000, and it's their hobby, but they have enough money to buy professional top of the line equipment. And I would imagine that more of those people buy those lenses than professional photographers, professional, wildlife photographers. But obviously, this is for professional wildlife photographers. I think a professional sports photographers this is This would be amazing for sports photography because of the flexibility. You've got basically from 300 millimeter equivalent to 1,000 millimeters without using a teleconverter, all at either F4.5 or F5.6 for sports. That would be amazing. In fact, when I want to get one of these and take it to one of my niece's soccer games, it would look like professional soccer pictures with this thing.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
It would be honestly too long really for something like hockey. But for, football or baseball, something like that would be amazing.
Yeah, and especially golf too. I used to cover the PGA,
Oh, yeah.
and actually was able to cover a small mini PGA type tournament with Tiger Woods earlier this year. And I was walking around with, I think I had 3 cameras. I had the 300 f4 with and without the 1.4 at times, and the 40 to 150, and then a wide angle lens. But man, when I used to cover PGA, I'd be walking around the entire golf course with a 400 2.8 or a 500. I forget what Canon, it was like a 4 or 4.5. And man, you're walking around a golf course with that weight, and you have to have a monopod with you all the time. And just going from hole to hole, and then trying to cram in to your little shooting spot. I would love having this lens shooting a golf tournament, because you wouldn't need a monopod, or most people wouldn't. And the mobility that you have and the freedom that you have to be able to walk around everywhere is just amazing. And especially the reach that lens has too with the millimeters. That's
right. Joanne has a good question.
Yeah, let me throw that up.
Can you use the 2x teleconverter, so the MC20 teleconverter with the internal switch? Yes, you can. If you use, it's a built-in 1.25 teleconverter on the 150-400, and that gives you 1,000 millimeter effective focal length. And then if you use the 2x converter, you've got a 2,000 millimeter lens at f11. So it's pretty intense. it's really long.
Yeah, and I had one.
It's really.
Go ahead, Rob.
Go ahead. Oh, I tried to. There was a hawk on a tree, probably 250 yards from the front of my house, and I saw him fly and land over there, and I could get him in the frame, but it was so far. There was so much atmospheric haze that I couldn't get a sharp shot from where I was.
Yeah, and I had a comment on my YouTube, the hands-on review that I did, where they were really skeptical about stacking teleconverters, with the 1.25 built in, and then we're putting on a 1.4 or a 2x, and they were like, oh, the image quality is going to be terrible. And obviously they haven't shot with it. I found no loss of quality when I was using the 1.2x, the built-in 1.25, and then also my 1.4. I did notice a little bit of some issues with the 2x, and I didn't have the lens long enough to really test this out fully, and it really could just be user error, or just the other thing too that you have to deal with. We're at such a magnification now, and you're photographing animals at a distance. The one shot I had in particular was a coyote who was across the road, and it's winter, but even in winter you get the asphalt hitting with the sun, and you get those the heat rays coming up that can I've had that happen in blurred photos on my 300 millimeter. So,
for sure.
I didn't notice any issues at all with the 1.4, and I didn't do enough testing with the 2x. So I don't know if you had any other experience, Rob.
About the same. I used the 2x for a minute. That was actually the first thing I did when I got the lens. I put the 2x inverter on it, put it on my 1x, because I wanted to really push it and see what I could do with it. And I got some tack sharp photos of a couple of birds in my yard. Nothing exciting, just more proof of concept than anything. But like I said, that one shot that I was trying to get that was 250 yards away, it wasn't very sharp, but I believe it was the distance and me trying to get it focused. And even with the image stabilization at that range, man, you're looking through a little bitty hole trying to keep your focus point in the right spot. And if you move a tiny bit, if you just breathe and you're moving forward and backward, you're going to change the plane of focus a lot at that distance. So,
yeah. And I did, let me see if I can throw this up here. Let me move my screen around a little bit. So I did get one decent shot stacked with the 2x and the 1.25. And so this is actually the sun at full frame. And
Wow.
unfortunately, I didn't have any sunspots, and I was looking for solar flares. But I mean, you know, I'm shooting the sun here through a solar filter, and this is pretty darn sharp for
Wow.
that.
Yeah.
And I actually thought I was at the full 1,000 millimeters, but I was looking at the XF, and so I was at like 935. So what's that, like about 1,850 millimeters? And this is full frame.
So you had
on
even
that.
more reach than you could have used. Yeah.
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 But man, you know, even trying to find the sun in the viewfinder, that was a little challenging.
Yeah. And that's when the benefit of that zoom lens works. I was looking for birds, and when you're using even just the built-in teleconverter and you're 1,000 millimeters, it can be really hard to find your subject if you're photographing just small birds.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to zoom out, find the animal, then zoom back into it, and like you mentioned that I mentioned it, but the throw on the zoom is so short. It's like a quarter of a turn,
Mm-hmm.
and you're from 150 to 400 millimeters. So it makes it so much easier to use in a lot of ways than the 300 F4 with the 2X converter.
Yeah.
Rich made a comment about air shows, and that would, man, right I made a picture when I first got the lens, and I was just hoping that something alive was going to be in my yard when I was standing there. I'm just a few miles away from a little local airport, and a plane went over, and so I just threw up and took a picture of the plane, and then I realized I could see the guy talking. I can tell that I could see the guy with his little headset talking to the tower. Awesome. in the picture. It was unbelievable. Yeah, really cool.
And then see, we got Cal. Hey, Cal. Let's put that up to 11 when there's a live chat about Olympus. Hey, we're glad you're here for our live chat. Okay, so yeah, we talked about finding subjects. Any tips when using this lens and trying to find your subject?
Gosh, you know, that's something that you and I talked about yesterday too. Mm-hmm. This is not a beginner lens. Like, hey, I want to be a bird photographer. I'm going to buy this $7,500 lens and just go.
Piece of cake.
You know, it'll look like National Geographic. Yeah. There's a learning curve when you're talking about this really long glass. And I zooming out, finding your subject, and then zooming into it through the, you know, when you're looking through the viewfinder, that's a great tip. Because if you're trying to when you're trying to pinpoint things that are really far away, and I can tell you, I'm sure you have too, with the 300 F4 with the 2X converter, you're talking the 1,200 millimeter field of view that you can't back out of. And it gets really challenging, especially when your subjects may be small birds or that kind of thing. It can be a real challenge. It takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, zoom.
That's why I don't know. I don't know if you've used the red dot sight that Olympus makes that mounts on the.
I haven't. Have you used that at all?
I haven't used it. A couple of guys have told me that it's really great. It works like a rifle sight. You know, you put a little red dot and you can kind of look through and see where your subject is, and it'll help you point your lens, your super telephoto lens. But I feel like with the, that's Sherman's just asking about that. Sure, you could use it with the dot sight. I would, if I were going to use it with the dot sight, I would probably zero the dot sight at the longest end of the range, because that's when it would come in the most handy. If you're already zoomed out all the way and you don't want to have to back out of the zoom, then you could just use the dot sight and hopefully find your subject more easily that way.
Yeah, and boy, I can't wait to use this with the new Bird AF. I haven't even installed that yet on my EM1X yet, but yeah, this is going to be a great addition, especially with this lens and that setup there.
Absolutely.
Let's see, we got another.
Says it's difficult to get sharp images with the F4 and the 2X. I don't find that at all. I had, when the 2X first came out, I had a pre-production loaner copy that wasn't sharp. And I was pretty disappointed with it, honestly. But my friend Kevin Lachlan with Wildside Nature Tours was telling me that he had two of them, and he didn't take them off either one of his cameras, and that they're great. So I sent back the loaner copy that I had. When I got my production MC20 teleconverter, I honestly can't tell the difference in the image quality with it and without it. It's just as sharp with the 2X converter.
Yeah, let me getting a photo up here we can talk about, Rob. Let me hold on one second. Let me move a couple screens around here. And okay, so this Rob, you photographed this guy at the zoo, and you were really excited about this image in particular. I want you to tell everyone about it here.
Yeah, this image in particular, it kind of speaks to the character of the lens. And, you know, I realized a couple of years ago that, you know, it's the lens that makes the picture much more than the camera does. And, you know, certain, yes, I'm sorry, I'm still watching the comments. And yeah, the 2X definitely makes the 300 harder to handle for sure. But, you know, there's lenses that are sharp, but they just don't have a nice look to them. They don't have a character that is pleasing. But I love the way this lens is tack sharp where it's focused, and then as it falls out of focus, the details or the blurred areas, the bokeh, become so beautiful and soft and pleasing. It's not you know, there's some lenses, and it's based on how the aperture is built into the lens itself, that you'll hear people describe a lens as having a busy bokeh. And you can tell this image in particular, everything's just nice and soft behind him. It's not distracting. And even there's a couple of just little, I don't know if it's dirt or dust in the air that's in front of his legs there that's out of focus. And even that is just, it's just nice and sort of photographic, and it just has a real natural look to it that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's a great shot, and especially with that rim lighting that he got around the back and everything. And, you know, Olympus cameras are great for, you know, getting these highlights and also still having a lot of detail in the shadows too.
That's right. And this shot, just for example, I was probably 150 feet from that silverback gorilla, and that's the full, that image is not cropped. That's the full frame out of the camera.
Grab another photo over here, Rob, have you talk about. And hopefully I dropped it on the right program here. It's funny doing this screen sharing stuff. I get a little bit of a slowness. All right, hold on 1 second here. And was there any other questions that had come up on the chat, Rob, while I'm trying to get this?
No, Mark's mentioning how the dot sight works independently of the lens. That's right. The dot sight is just literally a red dot that you can adjust to aim whatever lens you happen to be working with, for sure. So it'll work with this lens or the 300 f4. You know, that might make the 300 f4 with the teleconverter easier for you to use, because you can sight with the red dot instead of just looking through the lens at that 1200 millimeter effective focal length.
Okay, so this must have been a close-up photo, I'm assuming.
This is a close-up photo, and this speaks to what I was talking about earlier. How, you know, I'll just use a piece of equipment like I expect it to work, and then I usually find the edge of the whether it's image quality or the functionality or whatever. And this was at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, and it was inside of the orchid house, so it's relatively dark. I don't remember what the ISO is, probably 1600 or 3200, but I was, I don't know, 4 feet from these flowers, and I didn't think anything about it. I was an aperture priority, and I just took a couple of shots, and then later I thought, you know, it was really dark in there. I wonder what my shutter speed was. It was a 25th of a second. So here I'm hand holding a 1000 millimeter lens at this ridiculously slow shutter speed and getting a tack sharp image in the dark 4 feet away. It was just, you know, like I said, that just speaks to how I feel like I can just take this lens and use it however I want, and that it just did everything I asked it to do, and it did it beautifully.
Yeah, and we didn't have the new firmware at all, but or actually, yeah, firmware for the camera. But I understand that we're going to be able to do focus stacking
That's
with
right.
this, which that's going to be
I was thinking about that when I took this shot. I was like, man, I wish I had the focus stacking update already.
It is, isn't it a little weird though, using such a big lens when you're doing these macro shots? Because I remember taking a couple of close-ups too, and it's like, boy, you know, that 60mm lens is so tiny, and now all of a sudden we got this big monster that we're doing. But it's interesting because, you know, you're further away, you get a whole different background, a whole different perspective on your shot.
That's right. And back to what you were saying about wildlife, you know, if I'm photographing tree frogs in Costa Rica, I don't have to get in a tree frog's face to use this thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I can be far away and still fill the frame with these tiny little frogs and still make the shots that I want to make without bugging the animals. It's great.
Yeah. I loved the shot that you had here too. And I mean, you know, just
Yeah,
that
thanks, man.
background knocked out and everything. And this is just really cool.
Exactly. Yeah. That's one of the things I love about this. And it looks like a painting almost.
Mm-hmm.
Just and that again speaks to the character of the lens, or the particular look that this lens has. I really liked it.
Yeah. And these flowers are tiny too, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. They're, I mean, a quarter of an inch, maybe. They're tiny.
And let me see here. Where's your, get this guy up here. And oops, there we go. So obviously great lighting on this, and let's check out the detail here. And look at that.
Yeah, anytime, as you know, anytime you're photographing wildlife, you want that eye to be nice and sharp, and you want all the detail right there. And this lens did not disappoint at all.
No, not at all. That's a fabulous shot. And again, with that background, I mean, it's hard to not get a nice background, you know, at such a high millimeter lens, because it's, you know, even if you're shooting it at f8 or 9 or 11, it's still going to throw out your background quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about the focusing, and let me see here if I can grab a couple photos here, because I wanted to talk about that as well. Let me pull up this bison here. You know, one of the interesting discussions that are out there in the interwebs is about how, you know, you're losing, you know, a 4.5 on the Olympus, for example, doesn't have has more depth of field than like a 4.5 on a full frame. And honestly, for me, when I'm using these lenses at such a high millimeter, I want a little bit extra depth of field. I think I was checking out the stats on like an 800mm lens with a full frame camera. You're getting, I think it was like 1.5 inches of depth of field at a subject 10 meters away. And that goes to 3 inches of depth of field on the Micro Four Thirds. And honestly, you know, I'd be interested to hear what you think, Rob. I don't mind having that extra depth of field when you're photographing wildlife at a distance at such high magnification. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. With a shot like this, you could very easily focus on the eye and have the nose out of focus.
Mm-hmm.
Or worse, you get the nose in focus and the eye's not sharp. You don't want that. You want a little extra depth of field for sure. Yeah.
And with this shot,
and it makes sense.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just the idea of having inherently a little more depth of field. A wider angle lens naturally has more depth of field. Mm-hmm. So since we're using a crop sensor, my 400mm lens is the same field of view as an 800mm lens on a full frame. So yes, a 400mm lens has more depth of field than an 800mm lens, just because that is actually a measurement of the lens itself. So, you know, yes, it does inherently have more depth of field, but with nature photography, I've never thought, man, it's just, you know, I've got too much depth of field in my nature images. I just don't.
And exactly, and like with this image here that I brought up, oops, I think I hit the wrong key combination here. This was shot at, so this was at 7.1, and let me see, I probably had the 1.25 built-in teleconverter working at this. And so even at 7.1, you know, I still don't have a whole lot of depth of field. This is the sharpest part here, but the eyes just caught just enough sharpness. And if this was like shot at an f2.8, for instance, this would have been sharp, and the eyes would have been to an extent not good in terms of it being a good photo. The eyes would have been a little bit too soft. Ideally, I would love to have these eyes just a hair sharper, but I think this fell into the range of being acceptable just by having just a little bit of extra depth of field on that image.
Mm-hmm.
And let me see here. Let me pull up another example of that.
One tip too, while you're pulling that up, if I'm shooting things that are that far away and I'm hand holding the camera, a lot of times I'll use continuous autofocus just to account for the fact that when I'm standing there, I might be just my breathing is going to move my focus plane. Right. And when you're talking about such shallow depth of field and these long distances, if you move a fraction of an inch, if you just move yourself a tiny bit, you can pull that camera out of focus. So I find that the continuous autofocus can help to lock that into place and kind of help account for that.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip, and I'll throw one right on top. I'll piggyback off of your great tip. Another thing that I'll do out in the field too is, especially when an animal's like sitting like this, I'll throw it into manual focus, put the motor drive on a high speed, and then I'll just slowly turn the manual focus ring a little bit. So then that way I get a whole range of focus points. And then, well, hey, you can always do focus stacking later because you have all those extra images. But then that's also going to, increase your odds of getting that eye sharp, because, you don't have a whole lot of depth of field. So you have not a whole lot of room for error. And, man, sometimes you're freezing, you're out and it's snowing and stuff like that. Your eyes are watering, and, it's tough to manual focus at these millimeters. So that's another way of doing it. So, so take both of those.
It would also be a great use for the focus bracketing. If you can set that to one of your function buttons. So in a situation like this, like you said, with the animals not moving, and just hit the focus bracketing and take a string of images, even if you're not going to stitch them together, just to be sure you get that one that's in tight focus. Yeah,
absolutely. And this image shows you how little depth of field you have. Oops, I hit the wrong keyboard again. Combo. So this was shot at 6.3 at 640 ISO. Or I'm sorry, 640 of a second at 2500 ISO. And, there's no noise in here. I don't have issues most of the time shooting at 2500 ISO. And, the nose is out of focus. The eyes, that's what you want. You want the eyes in focus. But, there's not a lot of depth of field in here. And me personally, I don't mind, I could have shot this at 4.5 and then lowered my ISO. I don't mind giving myself just, even if it's just a little bit, fractions of an inch more depth of field. I don't mind shooting at f6.3 instead of 4.5, even if I have to bump my ISO up a couple settings just to give me that extra depth of field. I don't know, how are you on all that, Rob? How do you shoot?
I totally agree. For me, I would rather have, I shoot at ISO 3200 a lot. A lot of what I'm shooting is, as you know, a lot of wildlife is not in beautiful light. It's not in bright, beautiful light, especially in, places like Costa Rica. You're under the jungle canopy, and it might be, a bright midday sun, but under the canopy, it's really shady and dark. And you're trying to freeze motion of, where monkeys are running around or birds or whatever. So I regularly shoot at ISO 3200 or 1600. Just to get the shutter speed that I need. So I'm certainly not scared to, if I feel like I need to go to, like you said, f6.3 or f8 to get a little more depth of field, I'm perfectly happy doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me see here. The one thing we were talking about, let me see here.
Sherman says the bird tracking on the X1 can find the eye of a deer too. That's cool.
Oh, let's throw that up here.
I've had very limited experience with that yet, but
yeah,
it works great.
Yeah, so you said you installed that bird tracking and you found one bird and it was working pretty good.
Yeah, literally walked outside for 45 minutes. One bird. Yeah.
Well, I'm in
Yes.
Montana here, and it's usually a lot colder than what it is, and it's actually as well. It's 45 out, so the birds aren't hitting our bird feeder right now. They did when we had some snowfall before, but they're out getting their regular stuff right now. So yeah, I don't have any incentive on installing the bird AF yet, but I'm hoping for a cold spell, and then we'll get the birds, and would like to try that out for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. Oh, so the other thing I was talking about, we were talking about finding subjects with the long millimeter. And the other thing, it's difficult finding the subjects when you're at that millimeter. But then the other thing is, too, when you're shooting at such a high millimeter, any type of movement, your hand holding this thing, normally, any type of motion is just exasperated at such a high millimeter. And we touched about it a little bit here, but I just wanted to sort of close out this discussion just on the image stabilization on Olympus. And I think, what is it? I think that they said it was like an eight-step image stabilization.
With the 1X.
And man, you need all of that for shooting at these millimeters, especially when you're putting on the 1.4 or the 2X teleconverter. And I've just been amazed at how well the image stabilization has been working when I had to do that. How about you, Rob?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, traditionally you would, if you're using a lens like this at the maximum range at 1,000 millimeters, you would want your shutter speed at 1,000th of a second or faster in order to get a sharp shot. That's just the conventional wisdom. So you can go 8 stops under that and get just as sharp a shot with this. And that is a huge difference.
Yeah.
And that's, a lot of times I'll shoot in aperture priority because I know if my shutter speed drops to 100th of a second, it's fine. If I'm using this, even the 300 F4 with the teleconverter, and I'm at 1,200 millimeters, I know I can hold that lens at a 30th of a second all day long. And I felt the same kind of confidence with the 150-400, even more so, like that shot of the flowers at a 25th of a second. And it wasn't hard. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't leaning the camera on anything. I was just, I try to have a good technique when I shoot, and I made the picture look fine. So, but when you're using a lens like this and you can hear the shutter open and close, it's such a long exposure. It goes click clack. You're like, wow, and it's still sharp. That's cool, man. It's like magic.
Yeah, and I've using some. I did some shots handheld, 50 megapixel images. I was doing some landscape images that came out just amazing. So there's some landscape uses for it too. Looks like a couple more questions coming in here. Rich saying, living in Southeast Alaska, I shoot at ISO 6400 more than I want to. There's a great noise reduction program that I use to eliminate noise. Yeah, there's a bunch of great noise reduction programs. Topaz is one of my favorites. DxO Labs, their Photo Lab 4 is really good. Actually, all these photos that I shot with that were done in Photo Lab 4 with their newer version of the noise reduction. So yeah, and the cameras themselves, if you expose properly, there's not that much of an issue with noise anymore.
That's right.
And let's see, Mark over here. Let me get Mark on YouTube. As this lens costs a lot more than the new 100-400, do you think it is worth the extra cost? Yeah, this is a great question, and I personally haven't used the 100-400, but I know you have, Rob, and we've talked about this, and you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I have used, and I do use the 100-400, and I find myself using that more often than the 300 F4 because of the versatility, right? Because of the just having a zoom lens, even though it's not as fast, it's an F5 to 6.3 lens. I still find myself using that for the versatility over the, slightly optically better 300 F4. But to answer the question, yes, it's in a whole different category than the 100-400. The 150-400 is a constant aperture, right? So it's f4.5 throughout the zoom range. It has the built-in teleconverter, which makes it f5.6 throughout the zoom range. That's huge. It also doesn't. It's internal focus and internal zoom. So the lens is as big as it is, and it doesn't. The lens barrel doesn't get longer when you change the focal length. It is, so, I mentioned the character of the lens. To me, the out of focus areas with the 150-400 are a little softer, a little more pleasing than the 100-400. Now, is it anything that if you had the 100-400, are you going to be mad about it? I don't think so at all. But if you compare the two, you can see the difference, right? I actually went I have a zoo membership here in Atlanta. So the week after I had to send back the 150-400, I took the 100-400 to the zoo with my kids. And I thought, well, this high dollar lens did a great job. What am I missing for $1,400, right? With the 100-400. And in practice, it was cool. There was a couple of times that I missed, a stop of light. I could have used a little faster shutter speed. There was a couple of times that the autofocus is not, I don't feel like it's as snappy on the 100-400 as it is on the 150-400 Pro. But, and then in comparing the images, some of the things, they're almost interchangeable. And then some of them are like, wow, yeah, the 150-400 really did a better job with whatever, like the backlit, that sort of hill where those silverback gorillas are. I made that shot again. I made photos of the lions from the same place. Like, I made very similar pictures. And you really can tell the difference. It just doesn't have that same kind of like rock solid, tack sharp autofocus that, you would rely on if somebody were paying you to make a picture. I might take 10 pictures with continuous autofocus to get the one shot in focus like I wanted with the 100-400. Whereas with the 150-400, I might take 2 shots because they're both solid and sharp. So yeah. It's one of those things. If you compare the two, you can definitely tell the difference. But it's, like Matt and I have talked about this, there are perfectly fine telephoto lenses for every system out there. And then there's the $12,000, the $15,000 super telephoto professional lenses. If you compared the two, you would absolutely see the difference. If you don't compare the two, the one that's, $2,000 is perfectly fine. You would learn to work around the limitations of it very easily. Whereas the high dollar lenses, maybe not, they don't have quite the same limitations.
Yeah. And, all excellent points. And, this also translates to, other lenses, not talking about between these two lenses. And it, you can have the same discussion between the 1X and then the Mark III, or, you can go right on down the line through all of the Olympus bodies. The higher end, they're going to have a couple more bells and whistles, a couple more extra features. But, the gear that you have still too is going to work well. And, obviously this lens is not priced for everyone. Even outside of that, we both talk about how lightweight it is. It's lightweight for us, but I do understand that there's, even this lens where we consider lightweight, it could be considered a heavy lens for other people, depending on physical ability. And, that's where the benefits of the 100-400 being even smaller and lighter is going to come into play.
For sure. And something that I think we touched on yesterday when we were talking, that if I hand one of my clients who uses, say, a Canon 1DX, a top of the line, big Canon full frame camera, and, a Canon 200-500, what I don't even know. It's been so long since I used, that universe, but, these giant lenses that they have that have the same range as what I have. And if I hand them the 1X with, what's basically a 1200 millimeter lens on it, they go, oh my gosh, it's so light. Because compared to the alternatives, then it's night and day. It's a third the weight and with the exact same reach.
So Maury has
and that's
interesting question here. So from the 150-400 examples and others, the backgrounds look more pleasing than the 300. Have you compared that? That's somewhat dependent on the lens, but it's also the millimeter too. And, with the 300, at any given f-stop, you're going to have X amount of depth of field. But then once you start getting up into higher millimeters, even at that same f-stop, your depth of field is going to keep on shrinking. And so that's going to make your backgrounds blur out even more. So, I think the shots that you saw that had the, even more intense, softer backgrounds, we were shooting at a higher millimeter than what you would have at the 300. And I think if you put the 1.4 on or the 2X, you'd be getting somewhat similar results in terms of depth of field in the background. Rob?
I think so too. I like the 300 optically. Really, the Olympus Pro lenses in general, I think, they're the blurred areas, the bokeh is very nice on it, I would think.
Mm-hmm. And we got a shout out from Moscow. But go ahead, Rob. Continue your.
Well, I was going to say, Konstantin has a really excellent point when we're talking about the 150-400 versus the 100-400, the F5 to 6.3. The image stabilizer in the 150-400 works with what is called Sync IS. Now, Sync IS is a specific thing. I went round and round when I reviewed the 100-400. So the 100-400, the image stabilizer in the 100-400 does work in conjunction with the stabilizer in some of the Olympus bodies. It is not, quote, Sync IS with a capital S, Sync IS. It is, I think the lens handles pitch and yaw and the body handles the roll or something like that. Now, the 100-400 F4 or 150-400 F4.5 Pro does have full 5-axis sync with a capital S, IS. So that's how you get the 8 stops of stabilization. With that 100-400, you get, I think it's still 4 or 5 stops of IS. I think it's 5 stops just with the body by itself. But the image stabilizer in the Pro lens does work more effectively than in the less expensive model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question there and great answer. And so Ron is asking, is the tripod mount removable? I thought it was. I didn't try taking it off. I can't recall.
I didn't try taking it off either.
Mm-mm. So it may be.
It doesn't. I looked at it and it doesn't look like it is, but I don't remember why I thought that.
Yeah.
In my 4 days with the lens, I didn't spend much time with.
I remember on some of my other, like my Canon lenses, you could see that there was like a little opening groove and you had to turn it into a certain position and then you can slide it off. So it may be. I don't know. Me personally, I don't know if I ever would take it off. I mean, I kind of like having that tripod mount, resting right in the palm of my hand, so I can stabilize the whole thing a lot better. So,
oh, that's funny because I hate that.
I noticed.
I love that. Everybody does.
To the side.
Yeah, what I normally do, I've got my 300 here, but I normally have it at like, let me see if you can see that, about there.
Yeah.
So that when I hold it vertically, it's still not in my hand. I don't want that in my hand.
Oh, I always,
because I like the whole lens to be setting in my palm so I can support the whole thing. I'm not just holding on to this thing.
I may have honestly missed a couple shots because I'm trying to rotate the tripod collar so that I can get that thing sitting in my hand.
It's just whatever you're used to. That's the beauty of it, is like we are both professional photographers and teachers, and we both do that totally differently. And that just goes to show you, man, there's no right way. There's no only one way to do it. It's whatever works the best for you. And, my advice is to try it both ways. Like if you feel like you can hold it steady or holding onto the tripod foot, great. If, for me, it's not distracting necessarily. I just feel like I have a better handle of the lens if I'm holding the lens itself. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on any of my lenses that I was able to take it off, I never took them off. So just because I like having that in the hand. So yeah. I spotted that when I was watching your video. I'm like, why the heck does he have that tripod collar up there? All right. Well, Hey, we want to thank everyone for attending here. We're about ready to wrap things up. So if anyone has any last second questions, go ahead and throw them in here and we'll answer them live. If not, go ahead and post your questions in the comments section. We'll be putting this up so that it'll stay up on both of our YouTube channels and Facebook and all that stuff. So go ahead and answer or ask any other questions and we'll go in there and answer them manually. I want to remind everyone, let me just do another plug here. So go to Matt Suess Photo and subscribe to YouTube over there for me, and for Rob, go over to Rob Knight Photography, subscribe to his YouTube channel. And let me get us back over here, and we'll wait for a couple other questions to come in, Rob. And in the meantime, you have any closing comments, and we'll wait for any other questions to come in.
Well, I think we covered it pretty well. Yeah, we've certainly covered any questions that I've had since I reviewed the lens and since you reviewed the lens. But yeah, what's your website? So everybody can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me just at mattsuess.com, MATTSUESS.com, and yeah, I'll have that in the description section of the video. And Rob, I'm sure you'll put yours there too. And Rob, what's your website?
Yeah, it's just robknightphotography.com.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty creative. I came up with that myself.
We got a question coming from Laura. What about using a lens protection like lens coat when Olympus made such an effort to manage heat with the white coating?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on the lens coat that you're using. I think if you're using one of those, camouflage ones, that's going to be a lot better than a black. So I don't think that will attract as much heat. But I also think too, if you're photographing in the desert, in Phoenix in the middle of the summer, that might, be something to think about. Could get pretty hot.
Mm-hmm.
Take the cover off and see how hot the lens is.
Right. I always, anytime I have clients that have lens coats on their lenses, I envy them. I think they look cool, but I've never used one. But it would make sense if you are in a place where it's direct heat that would maybe insulate the lens in a bad way and allow it to hold more heat than it might otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting.
I think it gives a little bit of protection to the lens too.
Idea.
Thanks for the info in the live chat. Awesome job. Oh, thanks, Mike. The 150-400 looks amazing, even for a hobbyist like me. That's great to hear, Mike. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see here. We got Jim.
Jim's got a good question.
Yeah. Would you use a filter to protect the 150-400 lens? So Olympus actually does have a filter. What was it? $299, $399. I can't remember the price. They're making a specific one for this. It's a 92 millimeter thread, I believe, right?
That's right. It's a giant filter for one. And you mentioned earlier the actual coating that's on the front element of that lens that helps water to bead off of it. And it's a very specific high-end finish on the front of that lens. And the Olympus, the reason that it is a $300 plus, I think, filter is that it has those same coatings as the actual front element of the lens.
Yeah.
And I usually just use the lens shade. I do. If I'm shooting, I've got the lens hood on, whatever lens I'm using. So I do that instead of the protective filters, basically. Mm-hmm. But if I was going to put a filter on my $7,500 lens, I would get the one that had the same coatings that it came with for sure.
You found it for $75?
95 millimeter.
You found it for $75?
7,500.
That might be a gray market one for sure. Yeah, and
it might not be full warranty.
Hey, that Olympus photographer said it was only $75. What's going on here? Yeah, and me personally, I don't use any filters either. It's, you got such great glass. I don't want to ruin it by just having a filter on front of it. So I use lens hoods or just be careful. But yeah, like what Rob said, if you are prone to using the filters, I would, you can get some cheaper ones. I would spend the extra money. You're already spending the money on the lens and get the Olympus one. And then Constantine, we did talk about the MC20 and MC14. So if you didn't catch us in the very beginning of the video, after we wrap this up, you'll be able to watch the replay and check out some stuff on that. But just real quickly, I've gotten excellent results with the 1.4, and I've had a little bit of issues with the MC20. It could be user error or just heat rays coming up from the earth. And Rob has had some really good success so far with the MC20 and the 1.4.
Yeah, for sure.
And let's see here. Got anything? Oh, so Constantine's saying it's 95 millimeter. I was saying 92. So right in the. And then Maury saying there's been some conflicting reports that they will include the filter. I don't have any information on that. As far as I understood, the filter was going to be separate, and I haven't heard anything different from that.
No, they didn't. It was definitely explained to us in our product briefing that it was a separate accessory. Mm-hmm. But then again, depending on where you live, I know there's sometimes when certain markets have, I think the EM1 Mark III, if you pre-ordered it in Europe, you got the battery grip with it for free. And so it might depend on what part of the world you're in, but I haven't heard anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, hey, thank you once again, everyone, for tuning in live or watching it on the replay. Rob, thank you very much for coming on my first ever live stream. I haven't heard any complaints about audio or anything like that in the comments, so maybe we pulled it off.
Me neither.
Technical hitches and everything. So,
yeah, thanks a lot, man. And so either everything's working or we just can't hear them. So
we probably only had like 5 people watching, and for some reason it was working perfect for them. Hey, thanks so much, Rob.
Yeah, thanks again for putting this together, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Everyone. And Rob, you can stay on.